Hi, I'm Bill Burnett. When I give talks to job seekers about the peak interview, it's all about winning the interview. In order to win the interview, you have to create peaks in the mind of the hiring manager, because peaks are what define the quality of that experience. In order to create peaks, you have to have a perfect baseline interview. And to create a perfect baseline interview, it helps a great deal to be able to tell stories in answer to open-ended questions. What are stories supposed to accomplish in the job interview? Well, first and foremost, stories are a wonderful platform that you can use to convince the hiring manager that you have the competencies necessary for the job. Which do you think is more believable? If I stand up here and I say, I have very strong leadership skills and I'm a good problem solver, or I tell you a story about a situation that I ran into at work in which in the course of the narrative, it becomes apparent that I took a leadership role in that project and that the problem solution came from me. That's a much more tangible example of both leadership and problem solving than simply making a statement that I'm capable of it. It's much more credible, it's more believable. In addition to being a platform for displaying your competencies, the story serves another purpose. It really engages the hiring manager. You want the story to be intriguing, interesting, engaging, so that the hiring manager remembers the story. It's an important way to stand out in the job interview. So now you're asking yourself, okay, great, I understand what the objectives are. The what is how to display my competencies, and I want to have an intriguing, engaging, surprising perhaps story that the hiring manager will remember. So how do I go about doing that? Well, here's the way to start. When you first start to craft stories for the job interview, the best place to start is look for those turning points in your life. Turning points are wonderful because they start in one direction and they end up someplace else. That's why we call them turning points. Make a list of all the turning points that you can think of in your life. They could be personal turning points, they could be career turning points, they could be turning points within a job, turning points within a project, turning points for the business, for the industry. For whatever it is, you want to make a list of turning points. Turning points, because of their nature of change, provide a wonderful platform on which to practice designing stories. And some of those turning points you'll find useful when you actually create stories for the job interview. Start by laying out the narrative of the event that caused the turning point. Start at the beginning, take you through whatever it is that caused the turning point to the end. Then go back and look for conflict. Turning points almost always happen because there was some element of conflict involved. Things didn't go the way they were planned. That's why they're a turning point. Look for that conflict, because in that conflict is where you can sometimes build some of the surprise, some of the unexpectedness that you want to have in the story. When you have the narrative of your story formed, then what you want to think about is, how do I create a headline for this story that will really bring it to life, that will grab the listener and pull them in? And it could be something as simple as, we thought that this project would be dead simple. We started out, and lo and behold, were we surprised, because it turned out completely differently. Anything that uses that sort of a methodology is great. It intrigues the listener. I use something similar when I talk about my greatest weakness. I start out by saying, ice cream. Ice cream is my greatest weakness. Now I know you don't think it has anything to do with business, but it turns out it really did. Now you want to know how ice cream impacted the business, right? Well, that's another story for another time. After you've worked through some practice with turning point stories, then go and make a list of all the things in your career that you're most proud of. In fact, you can stretch beyond your career to even your personal life. Those things that you're most proud of. They should be things that you did, not that you had children or that you're proud of your children, but things that you accomplished. Now, go through and create narratives around what happened that caused you to be successful in whatever it is that you did that you're proud of. Typically, in that narrative, you overcame some conflict. People generally are proud of something when it wasn't that easy to do, when there was some challenge that you had to overcome. And you can find that conflict in the people that you needed to convince, the boss that doubted that you were be successful in pursuing this particular interest, a technical challenge that needed to be overcome, a process challenge, a business model challenge. It could be any number of things where that conflict resides. You want to use that conflict as the basis around which you can build story elements that display your competencies. It's very often in overcoming conflict that we display our competencies. Write your stories around creating as many competencies as you can in the story, because when you get to the job interview, the competencies that you want to display may be job dependent, and therefore you want to highlight certain competencies and not worry too much about others. After you've gone through and created stories around your most proud moments, go back then and look at your failures. Make a list of the things that you attempted that didn't turn out well. This is a good place to find the answer to that question, what's your greatest weakness? Because what you can do is you can talk about a failure in terms of what you learned and how you were able to use that learning in the future to overcome future obstacles. I use a story about a failure that leads into a story of a huge success. And the way I tell the story is I leave it with the ending of, it really looked bad at that point, but it turned into one of the biggest successes of my career. That begs for that follow-on question that's going to come, tell me about that success. And it's a wonderful opportunity to lead the hiring manager to ask you a question that you want them to ask. So, the way to craft stories is start with turning points, then go for stories around your greatest accomplishments, those things you're most proud of, and then create stories around your weaknesses, your failures. That'll give you a great deal of practice around creating stories. It will also give you a wealth of stories that you can utilize in the job interview to help create that perfect baseline interview on which you can grow the peaks. I'm Bill Burnett for the Peak Interview.